starting with the very first phase, which is the pre-independence phase. And in the pre-independence phase, what we see is that in India, even before independence, we do see evidences where there are number of NGOs that were in existence during this period as well. Some examples that we talked about was examples like the Arya Samaj or the Brahma Samaj. In fact, even the Indian National Congress during its initial days, even the Indian National Congress was established as a non-governmental organization. It later on transformed into a political party. Okay. We had seen that these groups that were there, they were individual group based, but primarily what were they working towards? So they were working towards social empowerment, they were working towards reforms, women empowerment, etc. These were primarily the role that they had played, and they were generally rooted in caste and religion. That means if you look at these organizations, the nature of these organizations, they were caste and religion based organizations. So primarily all these organizations, most of these organizations that were there, they had emerged because of the problems that existed in contemporary Hinduism. That means there were overemphasis that was placed on caste. There were issues related to women and how the society that was there, it was patriarchal by nature. Okay. So in order to come up with reforms, or in order to bring reforms to the social structure, these institutions that were there, that were NGOs, and these institutions were primarily working. But it was not limited only to Hinduism. Yes, primarily Hinduism, because majority of the population belongs to this Hinduism, but not only restricted to Hinduism. Okay, there were other organizations, they were talking about reforms in other religion as well. Okay. Post that, we now come to the post-independence phase, and during this post-independence phase, we see that initially there were two very important developments. The first was that there was the Constitution of India being framed, and the framing of the Constitution was very important because Constitution was a document which was considered to be the document which could result into empowerment. That means, like we talk about the Magna Carta, which was the document, legislation which provided individual rights. Similarly, we looked at the Constitution in the same manner during the 1940s and the 1950s. Our understanding with respect to Constitution was that all the social problems that exist, all the societal issues, all the economic issues that were there, all this could be resolved by the Constitution. Now, all of this could be resolved by the Constitution. The Constitution did have provisions which could help us resolve all of these issues. Clear? So, adoption of Constitution was a very important event during this period. But it was not just the adoption of Constitution, also because there was a democratic structure that we had adopted for. So, the adoption of democracy did what? The adoption of democracy made us believe that with the political parties who represent us, if they are representing us, they will take care of the issues that concern us. So, NGOs which were playing the role of an activist, and they were taking up activism, they were trying to reform the society during initial phase of our independence, they were caught in the euphoria of independence. So, there was very limited role that they played initially. Okay. So the first 2 decades of India's independence, you will find that not much of a role is being played by by non-governmental organizations. Okay. However, coming to the third phase, that is the phase where we say failure of government, starting with the mid 1960s to the 1980s. Now this becomes very important. Why? Because here we are talking about what? We are talking about failure of government. Remember one thing, failure of government does not mean failure of the state. We are talking about failure of those political parties who were in power. We are talking about, we are talking about the political setup failing to deliver what we initially conceived and envisaged that yes, this is what we are going to achieve. Okay? And in this case, we talked about 2 kinds of failures primarily, political failure and economic failure. Okay? Let's come to this particular part. Okay? Now, first thing that we started with our discussion yesterday was political failure. And the question is, why are we saying that the government failed politically? The government failed politically because the most important and the most basic principle of our constitution was the principle of democracy. The principle of democracy. It's the most important principle of our constitution. If there is no democracy, the other principles are null and void. If there is no democracy, the other principles automatically become null and void. है ना? तो अगर डेमोक्रेसी नहीं तो जस्टिस नहीं, अगर डेमोक्रेसी नहीं तो इक्वालिटी नहीं, अगर डेमोक्रेसी नहीं तो लिबर्टी नहीं. Clear? So other principles automatically become null and void. And this is what we see as, this becomes the very first victim of the political failure. Our democracy was the very first victim. Why? Because what we see is that in 1975, there was an imposition of national emergency. And this imposition is what? It is a compromise on our democratic values. It's a compromise on our democratic values. Now, देखो, let's try and understand what was the background of this imposition of national emergency. For the very first time, one political party, a political party was challenged. The political party which was ruling India from the 1950s, for the very first time the political party is being challenged. And rather than using democratic ways, to be able to bear that pressure, the political pressure, or at least the political party that was in power did not use the democratic ways. They did not use democratic ways. What they did was, they used the provision of the constitution which was the easy way out. क्या था? Impose national emergency. There was a compromise of democratic values. देखो, if you are in politics and if you have a political party, there will always be other political parties. And there will always be other political parties. They would be trying to do what? They would be trying to also gain more power. They will always be trying to gain more power. They will always be challenging you. But rather than addressing those challenges politically, what happened was, Indira Gandhi, who was in power during that period, rather than politically competing, what she did was, she imposed national emergency. It was a compromise on India's democratic values. Okay? Second point was 1960s emergence of competitive politics. Very, very important point. Very important point. Competitive politics, why in the 1960s? Why not before 1960s? Okay? So let's try and understand that. You will be giving a subheading here, right? Competitive politics. Write down competitive politics. I will not be dictating what is competitive politics. Whatever I am writing here, please copy that. Okay? So what is this competitive politics? Competitive politics in India emerged in the 1960s. It emerged in India in the 1960s. Now, what happened in the 1960s? The fourth general elections. We are talking about the fourth general elections, and during this particular period, elections were simultaneous in nature. Simultaneous elections. Simultaneous election means? Exactly. Simultaneous election means elections elections were to take place in the center and in the states at the same time. Okay? Simultaneous elections, the Congress party was able to retain the center. The Congress party was able to retain the center, but lost in most of the states. The Congress party lost in most of the states. So now it was not, it was not a default voting pattern that India and the Indian voters had, that we will vote for Congress party. It doesn't matter which political party is there, we will always vote for one political party. That was not anymore the case, not anymore default voting pattern. So now we started doing what? India started truly becoming a multi-party democracy. It was in the 1960s that India truly became a multi-party democracy. India truly became a multi-party democracy. So yes, there were political parties along with the Congress party, but they were not in a position to exercise power. It was only post 1967 that they came in a position to start exercising power. And that is the reason why I have mentioned India becomes truly a multi-party democracy during this very period. Okay? Now, competitive politics has both positive and negative impact. It has both positive impact on Indian democratic standards. It also has had negative impact on Indian democratic standards. What are those impacts? Let's try and understand that. First, we will be talking about negative impact. Negative impact of competitive politics. And the very first point here in negative impact, the very first point is what? Criminalization of politics. Criminalization of politics. Criminalization of politics was exactly, no, it was because of the competitive politics, because till the 1960s, the Congress party knew that whichever candidate they are likely to choose, that candidate is likely to win the elections. And during this particular period, ध्यान से सुनना क्या कह रहा हूं मैं. Yesterday itself, when I was ending, I did tell you tomorrow's class is very important. During this particular period, in the beginning, India's political culture was a saintly political culture. है ना, political culture हमारा saintly political culture था. मतलब क्या है, जो लोग politics में आते थे, they were there for a very specific purpose. The purpose was to do what? To use political power to serve the people. To serve the people. So during the initial days, politics was looked at as a platform, not for personal gains. It was looked at as a platform to achieve what? To achieve development, to achieve benefits for those who are a part of the vulnerable section. Okay. In fact, in India, the very first case of political corruption happened in the year 1956. ठीक है, क्या हुआ था 1956 में? LIC से 1.5 करोड़ रुपए गायब हो गए. This happened in 1956. 1.5 crore rupees went missing from LIC. Now, during that particular period, the finance minister blamed the finance secretary and the finance secretary blamed the finance minister. तो finance secretary, उनका कहना था कि ये finance minister ने किया है, finance minister का कहना था ये finance secretary ने किया है. The question is, how did this political corruption came to light? How did people know about this? So people came to know about this political corruption because it was one of the members of the Congress party itself, the political party which was in power. One of the members of the Congress party in 1956 during a parliamentary debate raised this question against the finance minister. है ना, और वो कैंडिडेट कौन थे? Who was the individual? The individual was Firoz Gandhi. The individual was Firoz Gandhi. He raised that question against the finance minister, and that resulted into the resignation of the finance minister. ठीक है, एक commission बैठा and all of this, but forget about that. It resulted into a resignation of the finance. आजकल ये सारी चीजें नहीं होती है, because India's political culture is now completely transformed. It has moved from that saintly political culture to what we call as an unsaintly political culture. Anyways, but this criminalization of politics it could be considered as the first dent to India's political culture, to India's ideal democratic system. First dent came in the form of criminalization of politics. But the question is, how did criminalization of politics become important? Why were, during this particular time, why were political parties using these candidates or using criminal elements. Why were the political parties using them? The political parties were using them because of competitive politics, that now they wanted to win elections at all cost. It doesn't matter, it doesn't matter, but we have to win the elections. Who is contesting, how they are winning, these things will not matter any. Criminalization of politics was the first dent. But this was the limited impact of competitive politics was not limited to criminalization of politics. Later on, it also emerged in the form of what? It also emerged in the form of political horse trading or political defections. Political defections, है ना? आया राम गया राम. Political defections. Political defections was the consequence of what? Political defections were the consequences of competitive politics, because now there were multiple political parties and all these political parties were contesting to win elections. So if one political party won elections, the people or the candidates from other political parties wanting to become ministers, wanting to occupy important political positions, they could easily defect from one political party and move on to other political parties. When did this start? 1960s. It was the 1960s when all of these ideas of political defection, political horse trading, corruption, this starts during this very period itself. It was another consequence of competitive politics, है ना? और इन चीजों की वजह से आज इंडियन डेमोक्रेटिक स्टैंडर्ड्स आर बीइंग क्वेश्चनड, है ना? इफ यू लुक एट क्रिमिनलाइजेशन ऑफ पॉलिटिक्स टुडे, approximately 43% of the MPs that are there, they are alleged criminals. So they have criminal cases registered against them. 43%, 43% क्या मतलब 50% हो गया, आधे लोग चोर हैं. This is what it means. Approximately 50%. और देखो what it also did establish is not that, it's not that this was only about criminals getting into politics. It actually established a criteria that to become a politician you need to be a criminal. Only then you can get into politics. या ये assumption है लोगों का, क्या करते हो, समाज सेवक है. अगर उसने समाज सेवक बोल दिया इसका मतलब क्या है, वो पॉलिटिशियन है. और जैसे ही वो आपने सुना कि वो ये कह रहा है कि मैं पॉलिटिक्स करता हूं या मैं पॉलिटिक्स में हूं, हम अज्यूम करते हैं ये जरूर क्रिमिनल ही हो, है ना? व्हाट इज इट? दिस इज समथिंग व्हिच हैज टुडे बिकम अ डिफॉल्ट आइडिया. व्हाई? बिकॉज ऑफ व्हाट हैपेंड इन द 1960s. क्लियर? And so is political horse trading, that is political defections. देखो 1960s was the very first instance when political defection started in India, but it took us approximately 17 to 18 years to first of all come up with a law on it. 1985 में we came up with a anti-defection law, the 10th schedule. 1985 through the 52nd constitutional amendment. उससे पहले तो पॉलिटिकल डिफेक्शन लीगल होता था. आप एक पार्टी से जीतो दूसरी पार्टी में चले जाओ, कोई कुछ बोलने वाला ही नहीं, है ना? उससे पहले तो पॉलिटिकल डिफेक्शंस लीगल होते थे. इट वाज ओनली इन 1985 दैट देयर वाज अ लॉ ब्रॉट फॉर इट, एंड सिंस 1985 द लॉ, वी कैन नॉट से द लॉ हैज बीन वेरी सक्सेसफुल. Anti-defection law has not been very successful. Even today, political defections are very common. It is very common, But the only thing is that today it is done in such a manner to make use of the loopholes that are present in the law. Okay, that is what basically happens. Clear? So whenever we talk about the negative impact, even political horse trading or political defections is also one of the problems that we see here. They are one of the problems that we see here. Clear? Now, when we are talking about the negative impact of competitive politics, negative impact of competitive politics, one more negative impact could be written as use of money to contest elections, financial power to contest elections. Elections have become a very, very costly exercise in India, and people with limited financial resources cannot even think of electoral victories. They cannot even think of electoral victories. So use of money in contesting elections. Fourth point, last. Freebies. Electoral promises, freebies. What is it? Populist policies. Populist policies. Did we talk about populist policies earlier? Yes or no? So populist policies have again emerged as a result of competitive politics. ठीक है, तो कोई कह रहा है कि हम 2500 रुपए देंगे, दूसरा कह रहा है कि हम 25,000 दे देंगे. Now where will that money come from, and is it even economically prudent? है ना, is it even economically prudent? That is something which is a debatable aspect. Do you know what is the combined deficit? Combined deficit of India includes center as well as all the states combined. What percentage of India's GDP is India's deficit? कोई जानता है? What is the ratio between India's GDP in comparison to the deficit that we have? Anyone? It is 93%. Or you will write it like this. It is 93%. And the Finance Commission, the 15th Finance Commission, had specifically reported on this. The 15th Finance Commission had specifically reported on this, and they had come up with a target that by 2026, India has to reduce its total deficit, both center and state, reduce the total deficit to 85%. Right now it is 93% of our जीडीपी। जितना हमारा जीडीपी है उतना ही हमारी डेफिसिट भी है। दैट इज बेसिकली द मीनिंग ऑफ इट, है ना। यूएसएस डेफिसिट कितना है? 37 ट्रिलियन डॉलर्स। इट्स जीडीपी इज ऑल्सो 37 ट्रिलियन अप्रोक्सीमेटली। दैट मीन्स इट हैज almost a deficit more than its GDP, and that is also almost the case for India as well. ठीक है, और इसका रीजन क्या है? प्राइमरी रीजन पॉपुलिस्ट पॉलिसीज, और उसका रीजन क्या है? नेगेटिव इंपैक्ट ऑफ कॉम्पिटिटिव पॉलिटिक्स। Is it understood? Yes or no? These 4 points that I have talked about, is it understood? What is the positive impact of competitive politics? Anyone? Just a moment, just a moment. Yes. Yes, you can say communal aspects. You can add religion also. हाँ, किसने कहा? ये इनिशियली हो रहा था। दैट इज, इफ यू गो बैक टू द 1950s, everything was ideal. With the emergence of competitive politics, because now political parties had to compete with each other, so political parties started using criminals as a way to win elections. So that is the reason why it became consequence हुआ ना. Okay, positive impact, there is one very important impact, which is even good governance is an impact of competitive politics. I am repeating what I said yesterday. Whatever I am talking about right now in the class, ठीक है, एक तो देखो ये bookish knowledge नहीं है. It is not something which you will find in a book or something like that. It is not bookish. So whatever I am discussing, if you understand it right now, you will be able to correlate it when you are writing your mains examination. इधर उधर देखते रहोगे, वहां भी इधर उधर देखोगे. ठीक है, this is what I am telling you. Because the concept, what is this concept here, how it has emerged, what are the consequences of it, is not something which you find in books. It is something which you read in newspapers, articles, different articles, and you consolidate your knowledge accordingly. Okay, so this is what I am telling you. This is the result of consolidated knowledge. जो भी कह रहा हूं, if you have not understood, you should be asking questions related to it. ठीक है? So why good governance is a positive impact of competitive politics, something which can bring about so many negatives. How does it potentially brings about the most important positive in governance? Absolutely correct. Because if a political party fails to follow the principles of good governance, they will be voted out of power. Why? Because now people have alternatives to vote for. They have alternatives to vote for. Okay, that is the reason why good governance is the positive consequence of it. देखो, 2014, the elections that were held in 2014 and the emergence of BJP as the single largest party with absolute majority, which in 2009, just go back 2009, 5 years, you will find that it was hardly able to win 130 or something seats, and suddenly that political party gains 150 seats. So from 130 odd seats, it goes on to win 280 odd seats. How does this happen? It happens because of the malgovernance that was taken up by that 10 years of the UPA government. It is because of that, because of the cases of corruption, because of Comptroller and Auditor General reporting corruption almost on daily basis. Every political event and every political policy ended with a corruption scam. It ended with a corruption scam. So that is the reason why good governance is also the consequence of competitive politics. Why? Because if one political party does not follow the principles of good governance, it will be voted out of power, and there will be an alternative political party that would be voted in power. That would be voted in power. देखो, कोई भी political party दूध की धुली नहीं होती है, लेकिन the BJP for the last 10 odd years, they know one thing. What? They know that we cannot indulge in and we cannot afford any massive scam of corruption. क्योंकि अगर एक भी scam हो गया, so people are likely to compare us with the UPA government, and they are going to vote us out of power. They are going to vote us out of power. So they know that, and that is the reason why you will find one thing that they tend to maintain is that to ensure that there is no case of corruption. At least there is no massive case of corruption that is reported. Okay, this is basic, and until now, unlike what we did see during the 2009 to 2014 era, even before that also Commonwealth scam etc. that was happening, that has not repeated. Why? It is because of competitive politics. Because they know the day we start, the people start comparing us to the last government, that is the day when our political career would be over and we will not be any more voted back to power. So good governance is a consequence of competitive politics, because political parties come to power realize that they have to uphold political parties coming to power realize that they have to uphold the principles of good governance. They have to uphold, I'm dictating what I've just written. They have to uphold the principles of good governance to remain in power. Political parties coming to power realize that they have to uphold the principles of good governance to remain in power. Clear? This is basically what competitive politics has. What is the impact of competitive politics? Okay. Have you written this? Everyone, should I move on? So, competitive politics we have talked about. We were discussing the third phase, failure of government. National emergency, competitive politics. I am just adding what you have already written. Political defections, criminalization of politics. ठीक है. Political failure also because of political instability. Just a moment. Political failure also because of political instability. Political instability. 1989 onwards, there was a phase of political instability in India. Okay. So also because of political instability. Clear? Just give me one moment. Economic failure. Why? War resulted into diversion of economic resources. Wars resulted into diversion of economic resources. India faced a food grain crisis in 1960s. 1960s. In 1980s, there was a balance of payment crisis. There was a balance of payment crisis. Balance of payment crisis. ठीक है. देखो, India faced a food grain crisis in the 1960s. India actually had to go to US and ask for food grains during the 1960s. US took up what is called as a PL 480 program. It's called as Public Law 480 program. And this PL 480 program that was there, that was one of the major cause what resulted into dissatisfaction of Indira Gandhi from US. देखो, India was facing in the 1960s, ध्यान से सुनो, ध्यान से सुनो. In the 1960s, India was facing almost a famine. We were facing a food grain shortage to an extent where there was almost a famine, and we instantly required food grains. Like what you see today in Afghanistan, suddenly there is a shortage of food grains and India starts supplying food grains. India was facing the same thing in the 1960s. And in the 1960s, we went to the US and we asked the US to help. और हमने दो conditions रखे थे. सबसे पहली चीज, first thing that we wanted was that we wanted that there should be an instantaneous supply of food grains. We wanted it instantly. That was not what US did. US supplied, though they did agree to supply food grains, but they supplied it in batches, which was not enough for us. And Indira Gandhi was not happy with this. Secondly, the quality of food grains was questionable. तो जो चीज वहां पर suitable नहीं था खाने के लिए, वो हमें दिया गया था in the 1960s. That was the background in which India started its green revolution. कि जो 1960s में हुआ वो दोबारा कभी नहीं होना चाहिए. It should not happen ever. So India was facing an economic crisis. देखो फेमाइन्स ये ब्रिटिश पीरियड में होता था जब लाखों लोग मर जाते थे. Tens and lakhs of individuals used to die on the roads. Why? Because we did not have enough food grains. Post independence, this was not we were expecting. This kind of governance is not what we were expecting. And that is exactly what we faced in the 1960s. So why was there an economic failure? India being an agricultural society, and the most important vocation was agriculture, but we did not have enough for feeding our own people. That was why there was an economic failure. Along with this, the balance of payment crisis. The balance of payment crisis. What was this balance of payment crisis about? It questioned India's economic policies, which meant that from 1950s, the policies that we had adopted, they were faulty policies, and that is the reason why it had culminated into an economic crisis, the balance of payment crisis. This is the reason why we say India as a political state failed by the from 1960s to 1980s. That failure was in the form of political failure as well as in the form of economic failure, because neither we were able to safeguard India's democratic standards, neither we were economically developing. Okay. On the other hand, if you look at countries like China, China started its reforms in the 1970s, 60s, 70s. It started its reforms. So it was not a democracy, but it was developing economically. So yes, forget about political failure, but economically it was developing. On the other hand, India's economy was deteriorating. It was deteriorating. Clear? So that is why there was a political failure and economic. Is this understood? Okay. Dekho, whenever you get an opportunity to write about this, use it. You may use it in the introduction of your answer. Okay. Competitive politics, failure of the state politically speaking, that is something that you can always use it. Okay. Now, what was the consequence of it? Because we are discussing it in the form of, NGO's, in the background of NGO's. So what was the consequence of this? Write down. The failure of the government, resulted into emergence of number of radical youth based organizations, full stop. There was a general dissatisfaction. From mainstream political process, resulting into emergence of, resulting into emergence of number of NGOs, full stop. So how does this impact evolution of NGOs? Because now the euphoria is over, है ना, वो जो euphoria था वो खत्म हो चुका है, and now there is an understanding among the society that yes, to be able to achieve our goals, we cannot be simply dependent upon the government. We cannot be simply dependent upon the political processes, and therefore we need to form non-governmental organizations and achieve the goals that we desire. ठीक है? Sir, will reservation not be a negative impact? देखो, अगर रिजर्वेशन नेगेटिव इम्पैक्ट लिख रहे हो ना तो भूल जाओ, क्या सिविल सर्विसेज क्रैक करना, ठीक है, क्योंकि अगर आपने ऐसा कुछ भी लिख दिया ना वहां पे, यू नेवर नो हु इज करेक्टिंग योर कॉपी, ठीक है, तो वो जीरो देंगे आगे के क्वेश्चन में भी, सिर्फ उस क्वेश्चन में नहीं, ठीक है. रिजर्वेशन, हाउ कैन यू कंसीडर रिजर्वेशन टू बी अ नेगेटिव इम्पैक्ट? रिजर्वेशन इज नॉट अ नेगेटिव इम्पैक्ट. Reservation is a negative impact for those who do not enjoy it. For otherwise, we all want reservation, but till the time we don't get it, we will always criticize it. ऐसा नहीं है, ठीक है. It is something that we have followed to achieve one of the constitutional goals of social justice. Okay, so it cannot be considered as a negative concept. Okay, so the 1960s and till the 1980s, political failure, economic failure, it has a consequence on emergence of NGO. ठीक है. Coming to the next point, write down 1990s onwards. Before that, हाँ कुछ पूछ रहे थे. Yes, you can definitely write that as well. Okay, he has absolutely mentioned a important point here. In positive impact, you can write formation of coalition government. You can definitely write formation of coalition government as a positive impact. Okay. Okay. Let's move on to the last phase. I think this is the fourth phase. The fourth phase that we are talking about. And here we are talking about the era of LPG. 1990s onwards, the era of LPG. The era of LPG. Now, how does LPG impact the role of NGOs or civil society? Can anyone answer this question? How does LPG impact the role of civil society? Private organizations funding the NGOs for better delivery of services or better governance. Okay. Anything else? Yes. Innovation. Yes. How are you relating it to innovation? What is the basic philosophy of LPG? Liberalization, privatization, globalization. What is the basic philosophy here? Increase participation of whom? Increase participation of local people. No. Yes. It is more participation coming from the private sector. Yes. So LPG is about what? LPG, liberalization, privatization and globalization. It is about the philosophy state it is about the philosophy of what? State minimalization. Please write down. State minimalization. What does this mean? The participation of the state or bureaucracy as a direct service provider has to decrease. LPG stands for liberalization, privatization and globalization. Okay? What is happening? What do we see here? LPG is about what? Liberalizing. What does liberalization mean? Liberalization means less control of the state. Liberalization means less control of the state. Okay? LPG does not mean liquid. I am lost. It means liberalization, privatization and globalization. देखो अगर मजाक में लिखा है आपने कॉन्ग्रेचुलेशंस, अगर सीरियसली लिखा है मोर कॉन्ग्रेचुलेशंस. ठीक है. Anyways, let's continue. State minimalization means what? The participation of the state or bureaucracy that is there as a direct provider of services, that is to decrease. है ना? देखो, if you see the diagram, pre-LPG, post-LPG role or functions, pre-LPG, post-LPG. Pre-LPG, you have one player, that is the state or bureaucracy, and the state and bureaucracy is responsible for doing everything. है ना? Post LPG, the diagram changes. Now, the responsibility of state or bureaucracy, the responsibility of state or bureaucracy is very limited. You can see this area has now shrunk. The state is shrinking. The functions of the state is shrinking. Clear? So what is happening now is that this space now is being occupied primarily by the, it is now being occupied by the private sector. You know, in the pre-LPG era, the state was responsible for everything. The state was responsible for everything. In the pre-LPG era, जो आपने PDS सुना होगा, public distribution system. So in the 1990s, there is something called as what started was called as targeted PDS, TPDS. Before that, before you go, if you go to the 1980s, the late 1980s, early 1990s, even the ration, the distribution of ration that was there, it was done by the state. It was done by the state. Or itna easy availability of everything was not there. Okay, you obviously you were not born then, but during that particular period, during that particular period ऐसा भी होता था कि जब आप किसी कोई एक राशन दुकान में चले जाओ, and if you ask them कि if you ask them for sugar, maybe they say they don't have sugar. ऐसा भी होता था कि उस समय इतना easy availability नहीं होता, and the state had control over everything, even distribution of food grains. The state had control. If you had to take up any business, you had to take permission from the state, and only then, if you are given that permission, only then you could take up businesses. Now what you see in the post LPG era is that there is a shrinking of state. There is a shrinking of state. And now what you see is that primarily it is the private sector which plays an important role. This is the post LPG era. Clear? Now what exactly is the problem during this particular era? And that is where the role of NGOs come. I will dictate the problem, don't worry. Dhyan se suno. There is a problem with the private sector. And what is that problem? The problem is that private sector has only profit motive. Private sector has, it has profit motive, which means welfare activities will not see the participation of the private sector. So if if there are people or the government wants to implement policies, welfare policies, private sector will not involve in welfare policies. Why? Because there is no profit. There is no profit. So the question is, if not state and the private sector is not interested, then who comes to the rescue of state? So state नहीं अगर कर रहा है तो कौन करेगा? There is where the NGOs and civil society comes. So now you would find that NGOs and civil society start playing a role of the mediators and managers of development. What they do? They start playing the role of mediators and managers of welfare of development. That is what they start playing the role. Okay? So a very important role post the LPG is adopted by the NGOs. They are playing the role of what? They are playing the role of mediators, of managers of the development process. That is what they are doing. Okay. Dekho, you will find that today, if the government wants to implement empowerment schemes for women, which organization do they choose? They choose self-help groups. They don't do it by themselves. They choose self-help groups. And it is through the self-help groups that the government implements all policies related to women empowerment. Okay. If you look at villages, you will find that in villages there are multiple self-help groups that are in existence. And if the government wants to take up policies, like if the government wants to implement a vocational training program, it will not do it through bureaucracy, because they know, okay, bureaucracy में गधे लोग हैं, आपको नहीं कह रहा हूं, लेकिन उनको पता है कि दे आर इनएफिशिएंट. सो व्हाट इज रिक्वायर्ड is that there is a need to do what? There is a need to include a more efficient organization in implementing it, and that is where they use the civil society. They start using the civil society, the self-help groups is what they, even welfare programs you find the civil society playing a role. And when did this all start? It is a post LPG development. Pre LPG everything was being done by the state. Clear? Please write this down. Post LPG, development activities have been outsourced to NGOs, full stop. NGOs have become the mediators and managers of development and welfare activities, full stop. Post LPG, we can observe a more important role played by NGOs as the state has decentralized welfare policies to be implemented by NGOs. Therefore, a greater role in governance. Full stop. Clear? So this is basically how NGOs have evolved. We started with our discussion on the first phase, pre-independence. From there, we have seen the second phase and the limited role of NGOs during this phase. In fact, absence of them. Then coming to the most important phase, that is the failure of government phase, where we see the reasons for failure, and these reasons for failure resulted into emergence of NGOs as an important institution. And finally, we come to the last phase, which is the phase of LPG or state minimalism. Okay, and there the role of NGOs have completely been transformed.